So there's a whole lot going on, and I want to start with the judges. The uh, judge that interceded in the Donald Trump uh, deportation of the Venezuelan gang members, and they might all have been gang members. Again, I'm not saying they weren't, but we didn't see that proof because of the way in which they were um, sequestered and then moved out of the country so quickly. So there was a restraining order, of course, issued saying, stop this deportation. It's not legal. And planes that are in the air need to turn around and come back to the U.S. And those that haven't taken off yet need to not take off. And despite all of that, planes that were in the air continued, and the plane that was still on the ground took off, and those Venezuelans were deported. The blowback on that has involved the judge who issued that order, who has said now that my order was violated, and I want an investigation with the government. I want government documents. You can fill in some of the specifics, but speaking of specifics, he asked for specifics on timing, because their original view was, hey, too late, we've already done it, wish we could have gotten this order sooner. But he is saying, I want to see specific timing where everything was when that order was issued. Now, and this is the last part that I'm really curious about from you, that judge is being vilified, named, doxxed, and even high-profile figures on the right are calling that judge out and calling for his impeachment, namely Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Can you speak to this?
Well, this is an outrage, what they're doing to the judge. And, all of these people, supposedly in good faith, were upset about President Biden's executive orders, are upset about the judicial review, making sure there was proper judicial review after there was a deliberative process, and sometimes, like the student loan forgiveness, was overturned by the courts, many times 2 judges to 1, many times by a Supreme Court that has been, stacked by Trump's appointees, just crowing about how important it was that there had been observance of the rule of law, and that here was Biden trying to get away with something with one of his executive orders. And I mean, we suspected at the time that a lot of those people were hypocrites, that they were just outcome determinative, that they didn't like Biden's policies, and the rest was all rhetoric and nonsense. Well, they've certainly been shown to be utter hypocrites with this one. This was designed by Trump to get around the rule of law. This was designed to do something that was very sketchy under the law and yet get away with this. This was an authoritarian impulse, if ever there was one. As I understand it, Trump only signed the order on Friday. Now, bear in mind, all these people were in custody. This right-wing rhetoric you're hearing now, the Stephen Millers of the world, who are fulminating that, oh my God, were these people supposed to be allowed to run loose and threaten the American public? None of the people put on the plane, as I understand it, was running around threatening the American public. They were all in custody already. So Trump took these people who were in custody already and put them on these, signed the order on Friday. The order was only released on Saturday. This was some of the greatest lawyering. The public interest lawyers who represented these Venezuelan plaintiffs are to be highly commended for staying on top of this, getting a hold of that order, realizing what was going on, and running to this judge on Saturday. The administration did not expect that they would be that diligent, that professional, those pro bono lawyers. They didn't expect that this judge would say, I don't care if it's a Saturday. I'm calling all of my staff in. We're going to have a hearing. We don't have 5 days a week of justice, and on 2 days, the weekend, you can do anything you want to, no matter how illegal and unconstitutional it is. So here it is. Saturday, they're having a hearing, unexpected by the administration. It appears that the administration of Trump just decided to do, Mark, whatever the hell they wanted to do. And whatever the hell they wanted to do was put these people on the planes, and no matter what the judge said, stick them on the planes and take them down to El Salvador, where they're paying $6 million of our taxpayer money so that this dictator in El Salvador can do his big show. He does his big propaganda thing because he's tough, he's dominant. Boy, he puts people in jail and makes them look terrible. You and me, Mark, They would deport us from this country. They'd put us in those white suits. They'd make us crouch in those positions. And the whole world would say, wow, do we look like some bad actors? And it would be you and me just put in those suits. We don't know anything really about these people because they've avoided due process and they've avoided finding out about these people. Well, so what actually happens, it gets worse and worse. Or in the words of Homan, this Homan, who's been given this huge power to deport people, and said, I don't care what the judges said. Now, I don't lightly compare people to early Hitler or early Stalin, but I don't think early Hitler and early Stalin or early Mussolini said, I don't care what the judges say. Mark, there's at least a fiction, there's at least a fig leaf that every one of these autocrats does care what judges say and is supposedly doing it. Somehow there's an exception to it, they're appealing it. But to say on national TV, this Homan, I don't care what the judges say, any decent administration in the history of this country would have fired him immediately. Anyway, what actually happens is that the judge is hearing this and the judge says, turn those planes around. That is an order. If the judge says to you, you're in contempt if you ask another question, and then you ask the question, you're going to be held in contempt. And when you argue, there wasn't a written order. Judge, I was waiting for the written order before I complied with what you ordered me to do in court orally. You would be laughed out of court. Every lawyer in America knows this is garbage. Any lawyer who says that this somehow is an exception, that you don't have to follow the order because it was oral and it wasn't written until an hour and a half later. And the other thing about it, it's not like it was said in the hallway. What's said in a federal court is taken down by the court reporter. There's a record of it. So any conscientious lawyer, and these lawyers who are representing the Trump administration, I'm sure they're ambitious. I'm sure they want things. Maybe they want judgeships. But they're liable to have a non-working bar card pretty soon. Because if you go to a federal hearing like that, and you know what the stakes are on a Saturday, you have the phone number and a way to contact your supervisor. And when that judge says from the bench, turn those planes around, and there was a bevy of government lawyers there for Trump, one or two of you goes outside immediately, gets on the phone and says, the judge just ordered to turn those two planes around. Anyway, it's very clear by now. There are actually flight records, but this judge wants to make a record of what happened, a formal court record. But they can actually prove, because these flight records are pretty infallible, that the planes were not turned around. One of the three planes took off even after the judge said, don't do this. This is my order. Don't do it. And so they absolutely defied a court order. This is a huge violation of our separation of powers, of the rule of law. All these Republican senators who said nothing. This is an absolute disgrace. This is the rule of law. And when a federal judge tells you to do something, Mark, you better do it. Now, they found a million reasons not to actually produce the records in court, which are going to show what it looks like is that when he said turn the planes around, one hadn't even taken off yet, but it took off anyway, even though he said stop, turn the planes around. But as of the time that he issued his order, it seems that one of them had maybe made it into international space. Okay. This is another absurd argument. I mean, I give the devil his due when they have an argument. They don't have an argument. This idea, let's assume they killed somebody over international waters. What do you think? Judge doesn't have power over crimes and torts because an American plane doing American business is over international waters? It's absurd. You turn the plane around and you land it. And you might wonder a couple of things about this. Number one, is this judge really a far left radical that Trump doesn't know, but he's appointed by Obama? This is an absolute lie from whole cloth. This judge was picked by George W. Bush, not making it up. The way it works in Washington, D.C. is that there are two federal court systems. One is the Superior Court, but the Superior Court of Washington, D.C. is picked by the president and approved by Congress, even though it's the local courts in Washington, D.C. That's one of the things that they don't have real home rule. So that's exactly what happens. This judge was picked by W, approved by the Senate, I think 96-0 or something like that, to sit on the Superior Court of Washington, D.C. Then he's such an excellent judge, so nonpartisan, that Obama picks him, again approved overwhelmingly, to sit on the U.S. District Court. And now with the passage of years, he's the chief judge. And you go through his background, Mark, it's such a farce to call him a radical. St. Albans, the elite school in Washington, D.C., Yale College, where he was the basketball star because he's 6'6" of the Yale team. Then he goes to Yale Law School. And then guess who he rubes with? Because I'm not making this up. Brett Kavanaugh. To call him a radical. He's also ruled for Trump in cases previously when Trump was around the first term. So this is completely out of whole cloth. This is disgraceful. And the idea that you would impeach somebody just so, your listeners and viewers are so learned on these things, but some people who may not be aware of this fact, you can appeal any judge. And that's what you do. You don't disobey or defy a federal judge. You appeal. So this kind of contumaciousness, this kind of contempt is punishable criminally and civilly. So now the last thing, Mark, is that the judge has stayed his hand, which is probably a very smart thing to do because it's become so controversial. At some point, you just say, the country doesn't need this constitutional crisis. So he has not demanded answers for another few days from the government, because the government is very reluctant to tell, the truth. They should almost give a Miranda warning. These lawyers for Trump should be given a Miranda warning, because when they turn over the flight logs, they're going to show that they were in contempt. And it's like, okay, who did you call? And what's going to actually happen when this all shakes out is one of those lawyers who was in court, they're not going to go to prison and lose their bar card. They're going to say, I called Deputy Assistant Attorney General so-and-so. I called this top official at DHS. And you know what he said to me? Don't turn the plane around. Screw it. What's the judge going to do? Land the plane, let the devil take the hindmost. And the last thing on it is you do wonder at the end of the day whether the Democrats want to die on this beach. Because at the end of this whole thing, most of these seem like pretty bad guys. It's going to be very hard to get them back out of El Salvador under the circumstances. And the whole political thing is fraught. But if they can keep the debate on the rule of law is an absolute winner that the Democrats are for, and the Republicans have sat there totally mum, all the hypocrites who yelled and screamed about Biden's executive orders.
I'm glad you touched on the politics, because I've mentioned before, and I'll just mention it now in the context of this conversation. It strikes me that this is a winner for the Republicans and for the right. This shows that, the Democrats care more about some legal detail than getting rid of these dangerous Venezuelans. That's the argument that Stephen Miller's making on. And you correctly point out timing, and you correctly point out all the details that are quite pertinent, of course. But the bottom line is the news cycle around this Venezuelan deportation will be won by the right, because it looks like the left, in this case represented by this judge who they vilified, in this ridiculous comical way, because as you say, he's not a lefty at all, appointed by George Bush. This judge is actually preventing Donald Trump, our Lord and Savior, and his people, and Holman more specifically, from deporting the most dangerous people who are in this country, this Venezuelan gang. That's the way it's going to be played out, and that's the way it's going to be digested by the American public. In other words, when you say you have to pick the hill you want to die on, this is a tough one, because I think the impression that is going to be left is different than the actual details legally,
What could break the Democrats' way is they didn't abide by due process. And so we don't even really know that these are all Venezuelan gang members. They're going to have relatives in Venezuela and in other countries who are going to come forward with things like, their high school graduation picture down in Caracas, or that they did some other wonderful thing and say, they got the wrong guy. This guy, maybe if he was running with Train de Aragua at all, it was pretty much as their hostage or as someone that they intimidated. Next thing you know, he gets scooped up. They're living in an apartment where this guy's basically a captive, because he's found himself a Train de Aragua pretty much captive in this apartment. And then they raid the whole place. And there's never been a hearing where somebody said, hey, wait a second, I can prove I was a captive in that apartment. Or there may be people, as there were when they deported the worst of the worst in that extremely expensive show deportation flight. More than half of those people had no criminal record whatsoever. They'd never been arrested for anything. I imagine what's going to happen with these people is that few of them have a criminal record, because somebody had to have enough brains over there to say the ones that we could have normally deported, let's just normally deport them. Let's give them an expedited hearing. Let's put on the evidence that they have a criminal record. Those are so easy. Then there'd be no controversy. And very nice that this guy in El Salvador is willing to take those people down there for a price. That's also, it seems to me, a rather contentious issue, deporting people to a third country. I mean, you think about it. And the other thing that's all wrong with this, Mark, and I think this will resonate with the people and not just be a total negative for Democrats who push the rule of law point, is that this Alien Enemies Act, it's from 1798. I remember the first memo that I wrote on Wall Street, I cited a maritime case from 1799. And the partner said to me, how about something from the 19th century? And I said, well, the Constitution's from the 18th century. And he said to me, how about something a little bit more recent as precedent? And the reason that this has not been used recently as a precedent is it has to do with times of war. It's only been used 3 times in our history. All 3 were in times of war. War of 1812, World War I, World War II. Never been used since World War II. There's a very simple way to deport people who are found to be criminally, or either criminals or engaged in criminal activity. They're not citizens. There's a very easy way to deport them. And the fact that Trump and Homan chose not to go that route suggests to me that a lot of people on that flight were people that they couldn't have gone that route. These are people who were not otherwise deportable, or some judge might have said, there's no basis to deport you. That will come out. Now, whether it'll be given any attention or not, they'll say they're all a bunch of liars, all these people in Caracas with the high school pictures. Don't believe it. We got an informant who says such and such. They may have another guy like Curveball. Remember Curveball that knew all about Iraq? Well, they're going to have a guy who knows all about trade to Iraq with some curveball who's going to say, yeah, they're all crooks. Every one of them on the flight was a crook. But that probably is not going to be the fact if anybody bothers to check it out, Mark, when the facts start.
Well, one of the things they're looking at is the tattoos. And one of the tattoos that's on one of these guys is actually a clock with the time of his daughter's birth on the clock. Okay. So again, and he might still be a gang member. Okay. I'm not saying he's not, but I'm saying that apparently they could tell by various tattoos that people were members of this gang. Well, this just in, one of those tattoos got into the outfield on you, because that's not, what the, and the mother stepped forward and said, my son's not in this. That tattoo is actually a clock with his daughter's birth time. So again, as you say, the details will come out.
You can also get jumped into some of these gangs. I had somebody, and that was the evidence against him, that he had done all those things because he had the gang tattoos. He was affiliated with the gang people. And then lo and behold, it was in Ventura County, and they couldn't back up their charges. And the judge threw the case out throughout the grand jury indictment on my motion. So tattoos, and like I said, these people get jumped in. Before you know it, you get a gang tattoo, whether you want one or you don't want one, because guess what? They don't tend to take no for an answer when they want to do something to you. And you could just be like an affiliate. You could be someone hanging around with them.
Let me get to, of course, that's so true. But let me get to the impeachment of the judge that was called for. I just have limited time with you, Debbie Katz. I want to try to be economical about it. So the impeachment of a judge that, again, this judge that you have, detailed for us.
Chief Judge Boasberg.
Yeah, so he's been, now vilified because he, again, went against the Venezuelan deportation not being part of due process. But I wonder if you could speak to the John Roberts remarks, the idea. They called upon, this guy in all the ways that they normally do, meaning Trump and Musk and high-profile GOP people, even Bondi, though, was the only one who said, I don't think we're looking at impeaching anyone, but even Bondi was kind of speaking the political speak around this judge's decision. But it was Roberts from the Supreme Court, the same guy in this concierge Supreme Court that Donald Trump has, that gave him the immunity, who said, hey, this is not cool. You've got to respect the rule of law here and respect the power and the appellate process when it comes to these judgeships.
I hope that's your expression, concierge Supreme Court, because that's terrific, Mark. I just want to say one thing, because it's Mark's Madness. It's March Madness. I see that Yale made it this year. let's again reflect for 1 second on this person who's supposed to be this lunatic, so out of step with America. He was the top basketball player on Yale's basketball team. He's someone who has done everything right in life, married with kids, had this distinguished career. This is such an outrage again for these Republican senators to stand by for this. This is no one who's even on the legal fringe. So Roberts, he did this about 6 years ago, and I was on with Laura Ingram's show at the time because he had just said right around Thanksgiving, I think it was 6 years ago, when Trump said, some Obama judge who's railroading me. And this may have been the one, the Hispanic judge with the Trump University, where he ended up paying $25 million, Trump did, for defrauding people, poor people who wanted to get ahead in life and had ponied up this money and got defrauded by Trump and Trump University. And Roberts came back then and said, we don't have Trump judges, Obama judges. We have a lot of really hardworking, serious judges who are trying to do the very best they can and call these cases right or wrong. All of a sudden, Laura Ingram's show and her guest wanted to impeach him. Now, this is when RBG was still around. I said, you guys have a 5-4 majority when the wind is blowing to the right, the way you want it blowing. And the reason you have 5-4 when the wind is blowing your way is because of Roberts. You really want to impeach this guy? And I was a controversial guest on Fox. It was 3-1. And I got to say, Roberts is one of the most respected people in America, which he was then, and he still is now. He had to go to bat on this one because what Trump said was so outrageous, so in violation of the rule of law. And you see that Trump hasn't really been tamped down very much. But I think on this particular issue, Mark, I think the Supreme Court is not going to go with Trump. I think that this Alien Enemies Act is only for time of war. I think that it cannot generally violate due process, because if the Supreme Court says, even 5-4, that the Alien Enemies Act, it can be used not in time of war, it can be used anytime like right now. Anyone who's not a U.S. citizen can be picked out without due process and say that there's an invasion. This invasion is a farce. The law says specifically in an invasion by a government. That's not something you have to read into it. It says invasion by a government. Tren de Aragua, you could look it up. I know there's now a Gulf of America, but there's no country called Tren de Aragua. They have not declared war or invaded us. If you can say any gang out there, any bunch of coyotes has invaded us, and so anybody who's supposedly part of that coyote network can be deported, boom, just like that, to some horror prison in Central America, as these people were. That would really freak people out. These aren't the only immigrants who've ever come to America. Think of all of our immigrant groups. That law has been around for 200 years. So Irish people they didn't like who were immigrants, Italian people, Jews they didn't like. All of them, before they became citizens of the United States, could have just been rounded up because they were supposedly part of La Cosa Nostra. They were supposedly part of some Jewish street gang and deported, just stuck on a plane like that with no due process, with no determination that you really even were one of the people in that gang who shared the gang's illegal objectives. This can't be right. So they're going to lose in the Supreme Court, Mark. That's my confident Katz prediction.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.